Hello and welcome to another segment of Open House here at Community Media. I'm Raymond Galker. I'll be your host. I'll be spending time with you as we have a fantastic host for you here today. His name is Dennis Ness. And with the New Oxford Historic Society, what we have been doing is putting together productions and some shorts and just going over how can we bring the history of this area to life in partnership with the New Oxford Historic Society. Mike Shen, Bob Wilson, and April Micah. They're doing fantastic jobs. That's Mayor April Micah. So as part of our efforts to share what we're learning with you so you can have a sense of your culture, of your place here in Adams County, York County. We're bringing people in to open house and doing some special productions. And Dennis Ness is one of the first historians that we have here. Dennis, thanks for being here.
Thanks. I like being here. Thank you.
Good. So Dennis, I just got to meet Dennis, and in a short period of time that I've been talking to you, your heart is very kind, and your motivation and desire and passion to share your life story and what you've found out about this area is it's rewarding to see, and it's uplifting. Thanks for being that way.
Well,
Thanks for being you, Dennis.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Dennis.
Well, I'd like to talk about my family, if I may. I'm married to a wonderful woman for 55 years. Between us, we had 2 sons. They're both married for 30 years. I have 2 great daughter-in-laws, and I have 5 grandchildren out of those 2 marriages and 1 great-granddaughter.
There you go.
Yeah, so I've been a very lucky soul in York County and in my life. As far as my education, I'm a older person. What I mean by that is baby boomer. When I got out of high school, I got a job in a factory like a lot of people do. I had a 4-year apprenticeship as a machinist, completed that. I worked there for a while, left that place, and I went to another factory. I had a 4-year apprenticeship of being an electrician. After that place closed up, I became an electrical inspector and had an electrical inspection agency for 17 years. What got me started on this was back in the 70s, whenever they had the first, the 200th anniversary of America, my wife's uncle came to my wife and said he had a family history and he wanted it retyped. So my wife said, yes, you do that. And fortunately or unfortunately, I was the proofreader. That's how I got immersed in these things of history. When I was finished, when she was finished with that and I was finished with my job of the part, her family said to me, well, where's your history at? Well, my Ness history was not available at the time, and I spent several years finding that. After I found that, which took me quite a while, right around 2000 or so, I started looking into other things in history, particularly in York County. I ended up at the York Historical Society in their library talking to Lila Forwin Shaw. She was a librarian at the time. And she said to me, she said, the history around Revolutionary period time in York County is a mess. And she said, we need somebody to straighten it out. Well, that was a pretty big thing. I didn't realize how big of a job it was. Mm-hmm. And I started working on it, and I retired in 2015, and from 2015 till now, I've been basically working semi-full-time on it, and I've got to the point now that I have built a database of all the people that were there in York County and that paid taxes and those who served in the militia and other people. And I bring this to a lot of people's attention because I think that that's necessary. We should know who those people were, and we should look at what they did. I don't know where you want to go from there, but if I could.
I'd like to first show that through all your efforts, you not only have information that nobody else has been able to pull together and unify, but you also were able to put together a book.
Yes, I did. And I want to point out something. At the York Historical Society is a gentleman who used to work at the museum up in Harrisburg. And I didn't coordinate with him, but when I wrote my book and he read it, he wanted a copy of it. He's one of the few people that have a copy of it that I sold him. And he said he liked it because it was, and I'm bragging here a little bit, that it was a pretty good list of what happened at the period of time. What I did when I did all these items and put everything in the documents in order, I put down what I call the proof. If I got my document out of the Pennsylvania archives, I wrote down the page number, and anywhere else that I've got my information, I wrote it down so anybody else could follow where I got it and use the information for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's the key thing whenever you do anything like this. If you want to do anything for research, and I'll take it off a little bit of a line here, what I'm going to be received, or what's going to happen in this documentation here, everybody, not everybody, but there's going to be a certain segment of people who are going to say, I want to follow my history and I want to know who was in the militia, I want to know what they did, and et cetera, so forth. I get these questions all the time. And let me tell you, the professional people have a lot to be desired. I'm not going to name them, and there's other institutions or other things that have lists, et cetera, of people who fought in the American Revolution and Civil War, and et cetera, and they have lists. But the thing of it is, when you have lists, you have to understand the history of how and why that got to be that way. And I want to explain to you how I think of how to explain it to the average person. When you get into this thing of the starting of the history and you want to know where other people are and the interaction of people and the documents, I liken it to a jigsaw puzzle covered by a crossword puzzle. The crossword puzzle part of it is all the documents that you see. There are books, there are written documents, there are papers. Everybody has a collection of that, and they're all different. And they're all hard to read. Along with that, if you go down to what I call the jigsaw puzzle, you got to look at the Pennsylvania archives. There's over 100 different volumes there. You have the sessions of Congress, then you have all the other documents. You have things like Fold 3, and other things where people have documents of back in the day. You have Washington's papers, you have Ben Franklin's papers, you have delegates to the Congress, they have papers. Washington's papers alone is something like 30 volumes. I'm sure everybody read them.
You're explaining all that. You've actually gone through all of that.
Yes, I have.
And documented it.
I didn't document it. What I'm saying is I collected them. I have my own copy of the Pennsylvania archives so that I could go in and look at it. I have my own copy from the Library of Congress of those particular sessions, congressional sessions. You need to look at that because those things are intertwined. And you know, that's just the way it is. And on top of having the crosswords puzzle on top of the jigsaw puzzle, the bingo card goes on top of that when you want to look at what the militia and the military did. Mm-hmm. My new database includes all land military in Pennsylvania. And what I tell when I get to a mixed group, I ask always, is anybody in here in the Navy? And inevitably somebody is. Mm-hmm. Would you know that Pennsylvania had a Navy as well? People don't know that, but we had a Navy. You know that Philadelphia is bordered on the Atlantic Ocean. That's how we got our Pennsylvania Navy back in the day.
Okay.
I didn't get into the Navy because it just got to be too big of a project to include everything. But I say to all the Navy people out there, we need somebody to check the Pennsylvania Navy out and provide the things. Now I'm going to move along to a little bit of the history. If I could get my man to put the color picture up. If you look at, what I like to tell everybody is, here is a picture of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and what this is, it tells you through the years how we got to where we're at, okay? To kind of explain that in short terms, as everybody knows through history, is William Penn got Pennsylvania. Well, we got Pennsylvania because the British beat the Dutch in a war, okay? And this was what we got. We got Delaware, and we got this land match right there. And then Penn called it Pennsylvania, okay?
And this time period now is about?
Late 1600s, and then around there somewhere. But what I want to point out to you is, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, it has there 16 something or other and something or other. And if you go up in the upper left-hand corner, the first 5 counties are up there. The third one is Philadelphia. The fourth one is Lancaster, and the fifth one is York. Okay, so we were the 5th county in Pennsylvania, and you can get that map yourself, and you can follow that at 1736 there, where the pink is. That's how they got that land there. Now, what I want to point out to you is, when you get to the conversation about early Pennsylvania, particularly in York County, you hear this story about the CSAPs and the Diggs. And what that was people from Maryland came up here and said, they own this area. What are you doing here? Well, the easy explanation for that is to look at that map. And I'll tell you why. If you notice, and everybody knows what they call the Mason-Dixon line, I'm sure everybody knows that. Well, that's that line on the bottom. And I'll show you another a picture in a minute. But that line originally by the king was set at 40th parallel. Well, back in the day, they had latitude and longitude. Back in the day, latitude was devised before longitude was. A lot of people don't know that, but that's the truth. And another thing is, and I'm sure everybody knows if you have a GPS in your car, it's degrees, minutes, and seconds. I'm sure you know that, right?
I do now.
Okay, well, how wide is a degree? There's the line down there, it says 40 degrees. Well, how wide is 40 degrees?
I don't know, Dennis.
Okay, well, that's my point. I ask rhetorical questions. 40 degrees on that particular map goes through the town of Philadelphia. If you look at it real close, it's there. Well, we didn't get it at 40 degrees, because if we would have, we'd all be sitting in the Confederacy right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, a degree is 69 minutes wide. 69 miles wide, 69 miles. Well, 69 miles is a lot. Mm-hmm. So if you go through anywhere on that map and you go 1 degree to the next degree, you're jumping 69 miles. And then when you go to minute, the minute is about 1 mile plus.
Okay.
And then when you have the next division, you have 1 mile, you divide that into 60 seconds. So you can figure out where you're at on a map. They only had, when they did this, they only had the latitude. So now you understand. And what happened was the Diggs people thought they could go up to the 40th latitude, and they had that land. Well, they went to the king, and the king said, nah, we can't have that, because we give half of Philadelphia to to Maryland. Mm-hmm. And the big deal was Maryland was basically Catholic at the time, and Pennsylvania was for the king's whatever, religion, mm-hmm. Okay? And if you look on that map, like I said, the 40, on the right-hand side, the lower corner, the 40th degree is there. The upper line is at 42, I think, 43, whatever. And that's how we got those parallel lines. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, there's a picture of the map of Pennsylvania, and it has a gray stripe on it, and it has a red stripe on it. The gray stripe represents what Connecticut wanted on Pennsylvania. If you look at Connecticut, on the United States map and you draw it parallel over, it goes to the top of Pennsylvania. They wanted that.
Well, I guess New York's out.
Well, it's I'll just put you this way to make it simple. That's what they declared that they owned that because of the
Horizontal line.
Of horizontal line. And then on the bottom, if you see the red line, that's where
Maryland.
Maryland said. And if you look at the yellow line, that's where Virginia said. So if we'd have lost those three battles, where would we be today?
We'd be in the white.
Yeah.
There you go.
When William Penn wanted this place, he wanted to have the port in Philadelphia, and he wanted to have access to central Pennsylvania by the Chesapeake Bay. It never came to be.
Right.
This was a compromise, and that's how we got the Mason-Dixon line. And another thing I want to tell you is if you look over on the start of the Mason-Dixon line, there's a radius there. That radius is supposed to be marked off of the steeple of a church in that county, which is in Delaware, okay? And then they came down to the parallel, and then they went straight across. But if that would have been the case, they'd have had to move the church on the other side of Philadelphia to make it work. See what I mean? Mm-hmm. So this is how we got the borders, okay? And we had this fighting over the years and whatever. But that's how we got started. And as you can see, those pictures that come down through, it just shows you how Pennsylvania grew and changed and et cetera. And as you can see, Pennsylvania was kind of filled out roughly about 1800s. And that's how we got what we have our state today.
So about the 1800s.
Roughly about 18. And I'll give you an example of that. Bring up the gray one, please. This is a 1777 map of York County. This is York and Cumberland County, York and Adams County together. And if you look at it, I've looked at this map quite a bit. If you look at it for the local people here, just below the Y on the York is Berwick. That's this township. Berwick was one of the 10 townships in Adams County. There's 17 townships in York and 10 townships in Adams County, today York and Adams County. One town called Yorktown, which I don't have, I'll show you the map, I don't have it on there, but you can see right there by the R, Yorktown is kind of in the middle. If you watch Ken Bird's show, that road that comes from Lancaster, which is on the right side of that map, it goes through to the river there, and then it goes to Pelham, and then it comes down to York. That is the Great Philadelphia Highway that Ken Burns talked about. And you get to York, then York, it goes to basically down to Hanover, and then it goes down, and that's how people got to the Shenandoah Mountains.
So you're saying the highway that went to Philadelphia
Yep.
is right around in here?
Right there. Right there. And it goes to Hemphill.
Come over this way?
Yep, there's Lancaster.
And there's Lancaster.
Yes.
So all this was Lancaster County at one point.
At one point it was. Well, actually, it came over to about here somewhere.
Okay.
And then they got the rest of it. If you go back to the other thing, it'll show you where it got. If you go, see how it came over there, the bump out, what I call a bump out? Mm-hmm. And then they divided York County after that, okay? And York County was out of, Adams County didn't get straightened out, I should say, or divided until 1800, okay? And a lot of the Adams County Revolutionary period time, the records are in York County, afraid to say that. But you can just see how it changes. In York County alone today, there's over 70 municipalities and townships and et cetera. That's how things have changed. Okay. Now, what happened in America is to get things started. Things were, except for the people that complained and talked about what they were doing on the Mason-Dixon line, everything was okay until one time in 1747. What happened was some pirates went to Delaware, and they went to two what they called plantations at the time, got into a rigmarole, shot one woman in the hip, and then took their slaves and their money and left. what happened, well, I mean, what that happened there is that Philadelphia figured out that they had no means to defend themselves. Philadelphia at that time was one of the biggest ship repair areas on the coast because it was in the middle, and the pirates and people, whatever else, could come in there and get their ships fixed. They were close to people, they were close to lumber, and everything was okay, but they had no defense. So Ben Franklin, he was in Philadelphia at the time, and he wrote a thing called The Plain Truth. We ought to do something, and government ought to straighten it out. Well, the problem was the Quakers and the different religious groups like that did not believe in defending themselves or killing anybody. Basically, it's the kill factor, what I call it. So Ben said, why don't we just get together, people, and call ourselves and associate and defend ourselves? Well, the government said no, but they all got together one day while the government was in session, and they said, hey, we got to do something. I'm paraphrasing what's in the book. Here you have to read multiple books to figure out what went on. But basically, the people got together and said, hey, you got to do something. If you're not going to do it, we're going to do it ourselves. Believe it or not, they made an association. Ben wrote the rules. And Ben at this time, by the way, was considered the most dangerous man in the colonies. I like to throw that out there. And they made this association. Ben wanted a cannon because that's how you can defend Philadelphia against the pirates. If they come up there with a ship, what are you going to do? Shoot a gun? No, they want a cannon. So the real story is that Ben went to New York State and said, hey, we want to borrow some cannons. He said, well, we might be able to give you one. So he said to his fellows, let's get together, take 2 cases of Miranda wine, and we'll go up to New York and see what we got. Well, they got 20 cannons.
20?
20.
That wine was good.
It's talk, baby. It was talk. That's a true story, believe it or not. And he brought the 20 cannons back. And reason I'm pointing this out to you is that later, in the Revolutionary period, what nobody ever talks about is, where did we get the expertise to fire cannons to the British? Where did we get the cannons to fire the British? Well, we know we got them in Boston because we stole them from the British, but how did we know what to do? The first people in the United States, I call this United States, that knew anything about cannons, how to build them, how to make them, how to shoot them, and put them on carriages, etc., was in Philadelphia. The oldest artillery unit in the nation is in Philadelphia, and they're still in place today, believe it or not. That's where it started. Well, they put all their stuff together. They built a couple buildings. They had some forts. They shot their cannons. And at one time, they even had a band in their association. But it was all extra legal. And what I mean by that is the only thing that the government did was they insisted that they bid commissions to the officers. That meant that from captain and lieutenant upwards to colonels and et cetera, they had to be commissioned by the government. And that was for liability issues, to be perfectly honest with you. But they let Ben and the men do what they did. So what did they do? They established a lottery to help pay for themselves. And later, believe it or not, they made it into a corporation. Yeah, that's in the book.
What's the name of the corporation?
The association.
The association. We'll call it the association.
Yeah, and he had 6 rules. And one of the rules was after all this was over with, they were going to
disband.
They never did.
No, I guess not. They still exist.
No, they don't.
The Cannon Group does.
No, well, the Cannon Group does. Yeah, the experience exists, yes,
Yeah.
and it came through the years, yes. But what happened is, and I'm going to bring it up a little bit closer now to York County. York County in this 1647 had themselves a couple of 3 companies of associators, all the way out to Chambersburg, and if you look in the Pennsylvania archives, they're listed there. But what you find out when you get into this stuff, I don't know why this is, but I do know why this is. They only keep track of the officers, never the privates. What did the the officers have to be commissioned by the government.
For liability.
Right. So you're always going to see the name of the officers, and more often than not, you're not going to see the name of the privates.
So liability, what were they liable for?
Well,
the government was liable for the life of the...
You can't go out and just march down somewhere and do something, and if somebody got killed, well, they'd go to the government to seek regress, I guess you could say.
Right.
And here's another thing about back in the day, what I tell people. The Pennsylvania legislature has on their website a list of all the laws from day one, number one, up till now. The law is there in chronological order, and not only that, it tells you the name of the law, and then it tells you the law in its entirety of the time. And that's another one of those things you need with the bingo card when you go looking at this stuff. Because if you get into, like I tell you about the association, what did they do legally to let this happen? And a lot of things that were done in Pennsylvania, even though they were old, you have to hunt up the law. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. That's how you get to find out what's going on and who does what and why and where. It's the law. Now, York County had 3, but they disbanded. And up through the 1750s, we had provincial government. What I mean by that is the governor was appointed basically by the king, and they came and went, but the governor was the one that had full tilt of everything, plus they had an assembly. They were the ones that made the laws. Getting into roughly about 1756, everything was okay from 47 to about 1756, and the Indians, through the French, started having problems. So Pennsylvania wrote its first militia law. Back in those days, when they wrote a law, the assembly approved it, the governor approved it, and then they shipped it over the 3,000 miles over to England and the various committees and commissions in there, and it finally would get to the king. And they all looked at it and so on and so forth. Well, in 1756, they had a rule that said that anyone that was religiously endowed, let's just say, or religiously at that point, they didn't have to go into the militia. So the king vetoed it at that point. The 1756 militia law was vetoed. And the king said, all of my subjects are subject to defending the crown. I want to point that out to you because that's very, very legally binding, and it comes up even till today. That's why you have a lot of the rules you have, because they don't consider religion a right. They consider religion separate from having like a right of other rights. Just say that. That was where it came from. Whether you agree with it or not, that's what happened. Moving on up to a little bit closer to time, everything else was okay. They talk about, and most of us Americans talk about taxation without representation. That's true to a point. Oh, can I throw up the other gray map, please? The gray, there you go. This map, if you notice the squiggly lines and et cetera, if you go down to San Luis State Park and down there at that point of York County, if you get up there in the pavilion, you can see where the break in the mountains is and how the people came across Wright's Ferry.
Is this over here, the gap?
No, up there.
Up here.
Up here, yeah. Right there, Wright's Ferry. See it right there? Right there it is. You can see it's written right there. Okay? That's Wright's Ferry. That's where most everybody came through to come through here. And I'll tell you what, that was a big crossing all the way through the Revolutionary period. You know, that was it. Along with that, you can see the mountains and how things was. What York County is basically, you have the mountains on the north and the west, and it's a low spot. The Indians used that in the old days. That was their hunting grounds, and they let people get there that didn't get along with the regular Indians. That land was sold by the Indians in from New York State to Penn.
They didn't even belong there.
No, well, they didn't want it because it was too far to travel.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what they did, which I think is kind of funny, but that's the way it is. Now, give me the white one, please. Now, this is a copy of all of the townships in York County at that time. I drew this up myself because there is no map like this. And this is going back to what you have to do with the jigsaw puzzle. You have to find out where everybody was from. And you have to find out so that you can tie it to where everything was. And to give you an example, people in the lower middle of the thing, it says Manheim Township. That's basically where Hanover was. If you were in Hanover and you wanted to go to Newbury, you had to go all the way up, or if you wanted to go to Chelmsford or Fawn, you had to go all the way this way. And what I tell everybody is, if you go back and you talk to the statistics of the day, a man could walk 20 miles in a day. A man on a horse could go 25 miles. And a man in a wagon can do about 15 miles a day. So if somebody says they were in York and they did something in Hanover, it would take roughly 2 days to go from York to Hanover. Mm-hmm. Okay? The same way, a lot of these townships, like, and what I get a charge out of is you have Hamilton Bond, you have Minn Allen out there at the far end of today's Adams County and today's York County. A lot of the townships in Adams County, there was 4 townships, I don't know which ones they are, but I think those are the 2 of them. They were formed before the land was bought by William Penn or whoever it was in the Penn family. If you look up there, it says Hellam. Hellam Township legally was the first township of York County. Everyone else was a part of Hellam Township. And Hellam Township is named for John Hellam. Everybody says something else, but there was a man, John Hellam, that's where the name came from. I live in York Township, that's next to Windsor and Hellam, and Manchester Township. Manchester Township today is broken into 3 different parts. Hellam's about the same. And York and Windsor and Hellam are broken, and there's today Springersbury Township. Everybody knows about Springersbury Township and other things that went on. So to bring it up to the Revolutionary period, what happens is the associators was in place, and whenever things started to go, what happened was people in the colonies got together and they put together a Congress. The first Congress, I don't know exactly the dates. I do know the date that they went out was in October. What they did is they got together, and a lot of people don't realize this, we boycotted them, which wasn't a very good thing to do, but that's what they did. They boycotted the British, and then Congress dissolved itself. And they said they would get back together in October of 74, and in 1775, they said, we'll get back together in May of 1775. Well, the reason I'm pointing that out to you is that there was a point of time when there was no unofficial, official Congress in place. So when Lexington and Concord happened in April of 75, where were we to go to complain? Well, the somewhat association that we had was dissolved, and they had to get back together again in May of 75 and try to figure out what to do. So that's what they did. That starts a lot of things off. Before Lexington and Concord happened, in York County, in 1774, they got together and they put together a committee of observation. That was a committee of most of the movers and shakers in York County to try and deal with the situation with the British. What they could do, I have no idea. Well, they got together in December of 1774, and then they called a committee of observation. They were observing what was happening, and they could make some changes or do whatever they had to do. Well, in 1775, in March of 1775, they got together and they made, I wrote an article that I wrote on Journal of American Revolution about the first company in Pennsylvania that was reorganized before the obstruction up in Boston. And what they did was they had 109 people got together and they drew up paperwork, and they named the captain, lieutenant, 2 lieutenants, and et cetera. The captain was James Smith, the first lieutenant was Thomas Hartley, and the second lieutenant was Henry Miller. They got together and they said they were going to get together every Saturday, collect dues, and they were going to be a company. Well, that's okay, but the reality of it is, just like I pointed out to you before, is that if you're going to have a company like that, you want to be an associator. And by the way, they didn't call themselves associators, they called themselves subscribers, so they wouldn't get in trouble with the British. Whenever they did do it, though, they were under they called themselves generally associators. Well, the associators had to be commissioned by the government, which was the British, because we had those people in charge. So it didn't last long before somebody figured out that, hey, we can't do this because we're not commissioned. To give you a side story about that, the paperwork for that is not in any of Pennsylvania archives or government paperwork anywhere. But all around 2005, up pops this agreement. And it's in York Historical Society right now. I've seen it. I've had it in my hands. It's written in the script. It's written on the paper. It's written in a book, actually. And it's written on the paper of the day. It has all 109 names on it. And the reason I'm saying that to you is everybody says that was done in Marsh Run. No, I checked all 106 names that I could find, and they were all from Yorktown, or that area, Manchester, Windsor, et cetera, in my neighborhood, so to speak. So you got to take what they tell you with a grain of salt. But anyway, that document was sent up to auction house in New York City, rather. And some very nice individuals from York County bought that thing for 5 figures and brought that document back to York Historic back in 2005. The reason I'm making a point about that is that tells you what people wanted to do. They wanted to get together and they wanted to associate and they wanted to do the right thing. But they didn't do it because they didn't understand what they could do and what they couldn't do. What happened after that became a series of people, as I say in my book, what happened was a fellow by the name of Bernard Eichenberger, went down to Baltimore. And Baltimore was down there organizing their militia and doing the military art, is what they call it. And he came up and told everybody up here what was happening. Well, then people started doing different companies and et cetera. And what I do in my book is there's a fellow by the name of John Adlam Jr. John Adlam Jr. was 17 years old, and he was in one of these companies that were all young men. That was men that were 22 or younger, usually 22 down to about 16. And they really liked themselves and they did a good job. And eventually what happened, he ended up going into the battle and being captured at Fort Washington and become prisoner of war. And he tells it in his book, not his book, in his memoirs. And his memoirs were posted in a book that I have, which took me 2 years to find, by the way, but that's available too. This period that I'm getting to in the beginning is very, very, what I call rambunctious. Everybody wanted to do something. On one hand, you had those that were the Whigs. They were the ones that were definitely going to do something, carry a gun, et cetera, so forth, organize, et cetera. On the other hand, you had the Tories. There were a few people who were Tories who didn't want to do anything, and they thought the king was doing everything correct. And kind of in the middle, what you had was the Germans, the Moravians, and the Quakers who didn't want to get involved with either party. That is the problem with finding out what goes on in the Revolutionary period, and I want to emphasize it's from basically 1774 to 1783. That's where the jigsaw puzzles and all that kind of stuff gets in. It's very difficult to do all that, and it's not easy.
So during this period, this American Revolution, 1774 to 1783, you had, at that point, the military organizations in the New York area were dissolved. And about 1774, they started then to
The
get
first
interest.
one, the first one, yes. But I want to point out to you, what happened then was, and this is what made me make the decision to all land military. It happens very fast in 1774. First, you have that, what I call the unnamed company in March, okay? Then in July, the Congress tells everybody to get yourself together, so they rejoin the associators in July, and they make 5 battalions of associators, and between 74 and 75, they put it together, okay? Along with that, when Congress goes back and goes in June 14th of 1775, that was when they put out that they wanted to have 6 companies to be raised in Pennsylvania, 2 companies in Virginia, and 2 companies in Maryland. 6 companies in PA tells you something right there. And they told them that they wanted them to be raised. The next day, they appointed Washington to be commander-in-chief. The reason I'm telling you this is I looked at it this way. They built the army from the bottom up. When they said about the companies, they told captains, lieutenants, and privates, and whoever else had to be in that company. Then they went to Washington, and they said, Washington, tell us what to do. Now I'm paraphrasing. So then Washington and Congress set about putting in generals and this, that, and the next thing, all the way down to colonels. The field staff is a colonel, lieutenant colonel, and a major. That comes out of the British Army, and that's how Congress wanted it to be set up. That made a lot of problems, but they did not appoint any colonels, you know. They did later. What happened a couple days later after Washington did all this and he was getting ready to leave, they said, oh, we want to make 2 more companies from Pennsylvania, which made a total of 8. And if you know anything about military, in that day and age, when you had 8 companies, you had a battalion. You couldn't go with 6 because it's too many. You needed somebody to run the show. So they appointed, Congress said to Pennsylvania, appoint a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, and a major. Well, the colonel was William Thompson, the lieutenant colonel was Edward Hand, and the major was Robert McCall, M-C-G-A-W. They were then put in charge, and the reason I say that is the Pennsylvania company that was put together in York County was the first one that was organized, and they were done organizing at July the 1st. Now you gotta remember that the call went out June the 14th. They were done, and the reason why they got done so quick is if you go back to that first company that was unknown, that's where they got their officers and that's where they got some of their men. That gave York County a heads up. History does not record that, but that's what happened, okay? They left York on July the 1st. They got to Boston roughly about the 20-something of August. They were there 2 days, and Washington had them do some skirmish work on the British on the neck where the Battle of Breed's and Bunker Hill was fought. And they lost some men and they had some people shot. That was the first skirmish of the Army in Boston, and that was from the people from York. The people from York were the first ones that were there. The people were York were the first ones that were in the skirmish. And this is what I like to tell people when they don't want to hear it, Mike Doodle, later in October of that year, he decided this was not for him, so he asked Washington, can I resign? And Washington said, okay. And Washington gave him, the only one that I know of, a certificate mentioning that York was the first one in Boston, and York was the first one to engage the British, and it was co-signed by Charles Lee. Charles Lee was a former British officer who was second in command to Washington. You can't get any better than that. That certificate is in Washington's papers. You've got to dig into all this stuff to find all the real truth. I try to tell this to people that, particularly in Virginia, that people from York County were the first ones there. People from York County were the first ones to take on the British. Many people in the rest of the country don't believe that. I have documentation. That's all I'll say.
And this is 1775?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 1775. Then what happened later to that unit, Mr. Mike Doodle left, and Henry Miller, who was in the first thing, he took over. Henry Miller stayed with that unit, and that unit stayed with Washington. They talked about different things happening here, there, or whatever. That's not true. Mr. Miller stayed in the Army and got promoted all the way up to, I think, major or so. And then David Matson was the one underneath him. He also got promoted to captain, and below that was John Clark. He got promoted to captain of that particular company. That particular company was in Boston. They went to New York and helped defend New York. They were not at Fort Washington, they were at White Plains. And then they went down to a place called Trenton. You know what happened at Trenton?
The Battle of Trenton.
Yeah,
Right?
well, that was where what they call the turning point of the war. Well, that company was there. At that point in time, that was 77, and then to jump a little bit ahead and to kind of make things a little more even here. In 1777 is whenever the British took to take Philadelphia. Well, when they took Philadelphia, and I'm leaving out the militia right here, right now. When they took Philadelphia, of course, we all know that Congress left because they had to leave, and they went to Lancaster. Well, that wasn't good enough. They ended up in York. But what I'm trying to point out to you is this point in history. When they were in York, and a lot of people don't know this, York was under martial law. They appointed a colonel to run the county and the city. At that time, the militia was providing the guards for Congress and our money, with a little bit we had. We also gave four companies to protect. Washington went to Valley Forge, and between Valley Forge was a Schuylkill and the British. Well, in there, they put 4 companies from York County to take care of protecting Washington at Valley Forge. And Mr. Miller was at Valley Forge as well, helping Washington get things squared away. So we had a trifecta going on from York County, and this is what I try to tell people, that we're really involved in this stuff. That was a turning point of the war, and that was a turning point of just about everything, and we were involved in it. Okay?
We were involved from the beginning?
Yes.
And most of the major
Yes.
events.
Yes.
And it seems like President Washington, at that time it was general, he liked to surround himself with the York
Well, let me
men, didn't they?
well, along with that, whenever he first saw the first York company, he took 2 men out of there that got to be members of his Washington's Guard. And the reason why he took those 2 men out of there was because, I hate to say it, but they were head taller than anybody else, and he always liked to have the tall guys work for him.
You know?
That's the truth. I have that in my database as well, who they are. But they were in that company, and they went to work. Washington had his own guard. So, you know, that's just some of the things that you can come across. I'm going to start off with what happened. Like I told you, the Congress said to just about everybody, make up your own militia or what have you, what have you. Well, in York County, they made 5 battalions. And they broke the county up in different areas, and each one was here, there, whatever. I'm not going to show you that. It's kind of confusing. But they couldn't get the people to come out because of religion, et cetera, so forth. They did get 2,500, roughly 2,500 and 3,000 people in those 5 battalions. I don't have all the names, but that sounds to me like a pretty good number. Well, you think, well, that sounds like a lot. Well, at the time we're talking about, and I've checked this out, there's between 20 and 27,000 people in York County, okay? So that's 10%, roughly. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I can name 2 of them. One of them was Richard McAllister from Hanover, and the other was Michael Swope. And the reason why I know them 2 is because you gotta also understand this. They had no guns, they had no real anything else, and they marched all these men from York to what they called the flying camp over in Jersey. And the captains, as he went along, whoever decided to become a captain, he picked up the bill whenever they stopped to eat at a tavern. That's the way it was. The captains provided most of the stuff. Most of the people did not have arms. What they did when they got to the flying camp was they took the people who had arms or experience and put them into 2 battalions. One was by Swope and the other one was by McAllister. They sent the rest of the men home, particularly the married men. That's what they did. That's history, that's fact. The men that were left, McAllister basically stayed in New Jersey, and Swope ended up going across the river and ended up in Manhattan Island at a place called Fort Washington, where, to make a long story short, where he got captured. And the reason he got captured was because of what I consider the greatest traitor in the Revolutionary War. William Demont told Howe what the facility was there on the island, and they took him in 3 hours because they knew what to do. But nobody ever records that Mr. Demont was a traitor. He's a bigger traitor than what's his name is, that other guy. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
Whatever happened to him?
Who?
Demont was his name?
Demont got a job with Howe, and he ended up being an administrator in Philadelphia when they took Philadelphia.
Okay.
And then later, the reason we know is because he wrote a letter to the British people in charge. He said, how come you guys didn't pay me what you said you were going to pay me when I turned them in?
Oh, there you go.
And that's how, and it took us 100 years to find that out.
Okay.
Seriously. I mean, this is not something I found out. This is something somebody else found out. But whenever Fort Washington happened, we had roughly about 450 people with privates or whatever with Swope. And they were taken, marched down the island to New York, and they were treated miserably. There is a good book out about how prisoners were treated and how they were not treated at this period of time. Almost all of them died but 50. And I want to point something out to a lot of people that don't know. Whenever the men were taken, guess who got paid all the time? The officers. Imagine that. The men did not get paid, the prisoners, that is. And they were put in, let's say, confined jails, et cetera. The officers were living in town off of their salary they were getting from we the people. That's just the way it was. Sorry, that's a fact. And I talked about John Adlam. John Adlam was 17 or 18 years old at this time. What they did with the young men like that, they tried to keep them out of the prisons with all the men. So they became servants to the officers, and he became a servant to Mr. McGall and other officers. And he was paroled in January 1st. So he was there from February 16th to January the 10th. He paroled the 1st, but hung around and came back. And he was sick when he came back, and that was the end of his story because he couldn't get any more because he was paroled. And that's,
What happened to Mr. Swope?
Mr. Swope stayed there because they knew he was a miserable guy, and they kept him longer than all the other troops. Seriously, they did, because they didn't like him. The British knew who was who. One of the captains that was in that was a fellow by the name of Michael Smizer. If you go out on the other end of West York, there's a Smizer farm out there. I came across a document, I couldn't understand what it was. Here, what happened was Michael Smizer, while he was in captivity, and his men were in captivity, he took his pay and loaned it out to the men so they could buy food. And this was a
Loan.
well, a loan, but this was a piece of paper that said who got what. Half of his men died even though they got money, but that's the way it was. Most of the people died. And that set the color for how people liked the militia and or army and et cetera, so forth. That was the main incident in York County that I point to that set up everything. Whenever that happened, at the same time, the militia was trying to get together to figure out what rules or something to pass because there really wasn't any government. In 76, by the way, we didn't pay any taxes in 76, and we didn't pay any taxes in 77.
There you go.
Yeah, nobody knows that, but that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is they tried to make, well, somebody went to Ben Franklin, who was working with you guys, said, why don't you guys write the Constitution? We need a Constitution to run the show. So that's what Ben Franklin did. He got all these guys together. Now, they didn't know anything about running the Constitution. Well, Ben wrote the Constitution. He signed it off on his own. We never voted on it as the people, but Ben said, here you go. Here's the Constitution. What that did, that gave the members that were in the militia who were elected to the assembly power. They wrote the militia law. So in March 17th, 1777, they wrote the militia law.
And that was pretty much the law then.
That was the law then.
The land.
The associators went away.
Okay. Because the associators were part of the British.
Well, they were extra legal, but they were of the era,
Right.
if I could say that, of the era. And that era was gone. Now, and then I wanted to tell you one more thing that happened whenever Congress was there with good old Ben. June the 30th of 1775, Ben made the Committee of Safety.
Okay.
You hear a lot about, well, that was Ben's idea, and Ben ran it. You know what they did? They spent all the money they could find. And what happened eventually is they went out of money. They ran out of money, and they turned everything back to the governor, and he ran it from there on out. Okay. That's what happened, you know. But here's the problem of now we had a new law. The law said we've got to get this done within 40 days.
And this being?
The militia, organize your militia in 30 days.
And that came from Ben?
Well, not from Ben. It came from the person, the assembly. It's basically the assembly, but then the executive council is what they had at that time, okay?
Of Pennsylvania.
Of Pennsylvania, yes, okay. So Pennsylvania is in the militia business, okay? Well, yeah. Well, in April, Congress sends a message to the Committee of Safety and to the militia, we need 6,000 men to come and help us. And what happened at the time was Mr. McAllister became the leader of the organization in York County. And the organization consisted of one fellow who was considered a lieutenant, but he's paid at colonel pay, and 5 sub-lieutenants, and they were all paid a different amount of money. They broke that map up into 5 different areas. This is not, many people do this, but there's 5 areas. Like, for instance, we had 5 battalions. Now we have 5 areas for the sub-lieutenants.
Okay, oh, okay.
But to make that a little bit more complicated, they also wanted to have 8 battalions and 8 companies. So instead of having 5 battalions like we had under the Associators and an innumerable number of companies, now you had 8 and 8. And the reason for that was because of what happened with those guys dying up in New York. They didn't want to have everybody from one village, which had happened, go in and be captured by the British and all of them die. So what they did is split it up so that you had 480 people here, or 480 to 640 here, and here, and here, and here. And then that was only part of the people that were eligible to be in the military. So that's what they did, but that made a lot of problems, okay? So I'm gonna stop there. I don't know where we are in time, but I'm gonna stop there.
Cool. So, what got you started was that
That was my wife's fault.
your wife's fault. Yeah. You know, it had to do with her genealogy, her family history, and you found out that her family went back to this town.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and what was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Turner.
Turner.
Well, you have to look at it this way. Her father was a Turner and her mother was a Heindel.
Okay.
Heindels came over and were in Windsor Township. The Turner was an Irishman who got on the wrong side of the British and he snuck over the board and came in, whatever. My family is Ness, and my mother's side is a Fetro. The Nesses were the first ones here in 1731, and the Fetros came in the 1750s. And my wife's family all came in the 1750s.
So you said that the Nesses were some of the first people in this area?
They were in Upper Laycock Township in 1731. I mean, 1735, they bought their first plantation of my relative. Yeah.
Okay.
He had 2 plantations, a 200-acre plantation and a 100-acre plantation.
Okay. So this is interesting. The question is, how does people get the passion for history?
Well, here's the thing. What the problem is that there are so many roadblocks to get to where you're going to go. And I'll give you one simple roadblock. When I found out that Michael Ness, well, I knew Michael Ness was my relative, but I couldn't prove it. And one of the things I did was I went to Lancaster County, because that's where the stuff came from, and he was in Lancaster County, to find any records. Well, his name ended up NEAS in a log with a, what do they call that? When you die, you have a document that says where everything goes, okay?
Your will.
Your will, yeah. And I found a name, and it referred me to another book. And the book was Y186 or something. When I went to Y186, nothing. So on a whim one day, I thought, well, maybe the copier didn't make it, and it was X186. I don't know how I got out of it. So I put down X, and I put that in, and lo and behold, bingo. Mm-hmm. That's what you're up against. A lot of the old documents of the 17s and 80s, 17 and 1780s, were not clear. They took a feather off of a turkey, and they and a lot of stuff in York County and et cetera was put in the courthouse in a leaky roof. So you can imagine what your documents look like and how to find things down through. And a lot of them, there's spaces and empty. And that's what you got to fight. And that's where everybody gets discouraged. I just was too bullheaded. I wouldn't give up.
There you go.
and once I got into, let's say, the swing of things, then I understood what you could and couldn't do, and how to look at documents, how to change your computer and stuff to look at documents, who to go for documents, you know. And it's a, I can understand people not getting involved, you know. Once you get past the Civil War stuff, it's difficult. It really is. It's more than, you know, today everybody wants everything instantaneous. You don't get it that way when you go to history. You have to find one piece of, I found a scrap evidence down in Hanover that led me to a scrap evidence up in your historical, that led me to something on Pennsylvania archives, that led me to the Congressional Library. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And I'm talking about 3 or 4 years. And that discourages people immediately, and I understand that. Okay. One more thing I want to add before we cut the camera off. I did a little bit of, and this goes along with what we're talking about. I went through my data sheet and I looked up Berwick Township.
Okay.
And on the way in here, there's a thing called Peter Street. Now, why is it named Peter Street?
I have no idea.
Do you know who Peter Ickes is?
Nope.
Peter Ickes was a captain during the Revolutionary period. He was a captain in the 3rd Battalion in 1776, and he was a captain in 77, 78, all the way up to 83. And the other one was Andrew Foreman. I don't know if there's anything named a street named Foreman around here, but I checked, and guess what? There's no documents that prove that.
That proves that.
But I know that they were there because I have the documentation of all of the...
From your studies.
Yes, from the Peter Ickes. I have his name. I found that, okay? But there's no documents to show that he was in the 7th Battalion, the 8th Battalion. And by the way, one more thing. In 1778, a predecessor to me found that between of the 8 captains in the 6th and 8th Battalion, they reversed, the printer reversed from 2 to 8 on the 6th and the 8th Battalion. So one of them, so that's wrong too, to show you, somebody else found that out. I didn't find that out.
Well, they have those little types, that block typing back then at that time. So I guess that would have been easy to do.
Well, you got to remember that when this was done, there was nothing done prior to about 1875. And they started doing a lot of this stuff in 1880s and 1890s after everybody was dead. And the records were gone. So what are you going to do? But I'm just saying that I found it. Now, what I did, there's no list. What I did is there's a thing called fines. When you were in the military, a militia, and you didn't show up to the meeting, you paid dues. And that dues is called fines. And I found one list of fines of 130 people. So that's all I have for your information. But I do have the tax lists from 75 to 82. And one of the things I want to point out to you, in the militia, everybody says it was landowners. No. It was every white inhabitant. And in today's version is all the immigrants had to serve.
Only immigrants.
No, all people.
All people.
All people.
Okay.
All white inhabitants. And then it was an age deal. And there was no, well, there was exceptions for clergy and stuff like that. But basically, when it first came out, it was all white. And to give you another point on that, what made everybody unhappy is whenever the wonderful militia wrote, the people wrote the militia law, they had the lieutenant issue a warrant to the constable who gave them a list and issued a warrant to everybody that was eligible to be in the militia. Everybody. So you got a warrant, and needless to say, that stirred everybody up from one end of York County to the other. They wanted to kill people, seriously. But that's what they did.
So the warrant was basically a draft. You were being drafted.
Yeah. Well, they used the word warrant. That's what was bad.
Because you had to pay or go to jail.
Yeah. Well, you went to jail. They didn't pay.
You didn't pay. Back then you couldn't pay your way out, right?
No. But that's what they wanted. They want them to show up at the meeting, to have the meetings, to organize. And it would warrant. The first 3 years was a warrant. The second 3 years, the warrant was given to the captain, and he went out to get the men. And then the war ended, and then they didn't have warrants any longer.
So this was to build a militia to fight against the British.
Well, the militia.
And then afterwards, too, they still needed it.
Well, originally that was the case, but then they found out another thing that happened. Remember I told you about colonels and like that? Well, the militia had their own colonels. And the Pennsylvania people had their own colonels. And later, the Army had their own colonels. So they went down to Brandywine in Philadelphia, who was in charge.
You had, what, several colonels, right?
That's what happened. Mm-hmm. And then the next year, all the colonels lost their job. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Not only that, they didn't have to pay them any longer.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of stuff that happens. It was ongoing, changing all the time. And you have to sit down. That's why I went to a database. The only way I could see it to work is say, all right, this is this year, what did they do? This is this year, what did they do? And, that's how I got it out.
Well, we are now out of time.
Okay.
So, but that doesn't mean we can't come back and have a conversation in the future.
That's okay with me.
Willing to do that.
Yes.
This is. Would you like to say anything to people that's been watching here before we leave?
The only thing I would say to the people watching here today is it's a very difficult thing to find history. I appreciate your tuning in and listening to me. And if you get into the thing that you want to do history, research or whatever, keep going, keep trying. It's a good hobby. I thank you.
It's like being a detective, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Mr. Ness, thanks for coming in and speaking with us.
Denny Ness, they call me Denny. Yeah.
Hey, Denny. I hope you enjoyed this taste of history here in York, the old Lancaster County, part of York County, and then we became Adams County. So we'll have other individuals like Dennis Ness to come in, or Denny Ness to come in and share what they found through their studies. And it's definitely a passion.
Oh, my.
Definitely a passion. Yeah. And it does make a better community, because the more that we do things for our community with the passion of our heart, the better our community grows. Plus, it's great to have a culture, to know your culture. And that's one thing that the New Oxford Historic Society has done well. They have systems set up that it's a good place to start. It's a good place to start your research. And as I said, our partners do a great job here. So thanks for watching this, and until we have a chance to bring another wonderful person in from the community doing great stuff, stay healthy, be kind, and you're precious.